Hey, coaches, welcome back to our Coaches Corner. I'm joined by Bryan Pieschel and Scott Touzinsky today. Guys, how you doing?
Doing good, Cary. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
So we've been trying to give coaches ideas and opportunities to get better while we're staying at home. We think it's important for our players to do so, so why shouldn't we hold ourselves to the same standard? So today, I don't want to steal Brian's thunder. This is kind of his idea, but I'm going to have a discussion about whether we should, what should we be focusing on, process or results, and how do those two things interact and how do they differ? Brian, you want to give us an idea of what you were thinking about?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is, especially within a club and within a club our size, we're all a part of something bigger than just the team that we're coaching, and we have a vision of what we want our players to accomplish, and it's not just about one season. It's about their overall development throughout the years, and in order for that to happen efficiently and effectively, everybody kind of has to be on the same page, and that's where I think the process versus results really has to be weighed out and understood what you're trying to accomplish. At the same time, realizing that if we're going about our jobs the right way and how we're training our kids, that we're going to find positive results because of how we develop our players. So it's not that we don't care about results; we only care about getting better. We just believe that the results will come. The results that we want, more often than not, will come, or at least we'll be in a position to achieve those results because of how we go about with our process of developing. And I think
Scotty,
there's some key parts in that we need to make sure we understand.
Scotty, we talk about what results matter. Do results matter for our club, for our individual teams, in terms of what does success mean? Before we dive into kind of the meat and potatoes of this whole thing, I really kind of want to get your perspective from like a national team, Jim, or even when you were at Long Beach State as a player and as a coach, how much was winning brought up? How much did we talk about winning in a training environment?
Yeah, when Brian started talking right there, it immediately brought me back to my time on the national team. And, the winning, we don't talk about winning a large goal per se. We talk always about winning the day. How can we win that day and become 1% to 2% better? And it's small little monumental feats, which, are very tiny, but exactly what we're talking about, the process that we go through that ultimately will get those results. I came into the national team in 2006. They had already started talking in 2004, right after they had finished the Olympics in Athens, about how they were going to win a gold medal in 2008. Now, obviously, I wasn't there for those first couple of years, and kind of when they started talking about the mission statement, like Reed Pretty brought up, and really trying to make a mission statement, stick to it, keep on looking back at it to, 2 steps back to 1 step forward, or vice versa. And when I got there in 2006, that process was, it was a slow climb. It wasn't like, boom, a straight shot up that large hill. But they didn't even win any tournaments from 04 to 06 when I got there. But they still felt like they were winning days upon days. And really what we talked about at Long Beach State was stacking those days. Hey, you can win, 1 or 2 in a row, but then you can also lose 5. But can you stack it every single day and get a little bit better and a little bit better? And, winning was never really on the top of our agenda until that final goal, which really was, at Long Beach, it was a two-year plan. And then in the national team, it was a 4-year plan, a quad, like we call it, to make sure that that final goal was reached. Because winning it in between hand doesn't do anything for the gold medal. I mean, it is small little steps along the way. If you win one, great. You feel good about yourself. But if you lose in Beijing, all those little wins were for nothing.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting listening to Murphy talk about that the other day. And it's a different process, but when he was going through his thought process of retiring or continuing on, and he's like, playing on the national team, it's not a 1-year decision. It's a 4-year decision. It's, you said it's a quad. Bryan, we talk about kind of the arc of a season and how we plan, we go into a practice planning mode, how we're going to ramp up, at the beginning of the season in terms of maybe it's more skill based and things like that. And then you're getting into a qualifier season, getting into nationals, and, give us a little idea about, especially when you're talking to your coaches, how to think about practice and the process in terms of the arc of a season.
Well, one of the most important things is each coach is going to have to know their team. They're going to have to know their strengths. They're going to know their weaknesses. We understand at the beginning of the year, everybody's going to need skill development, and that'll vary dependent upon the level that your players are at, the age your players are at, the experience factor all plays into that. So understanding your team first and foremost is really, really important when you're going to start talking about practice planning, right? Because 18 Royal is obviously going to be doing things much differently than what 14 Royal or 12 Royal is going to be doing, right? But important, to understand is that the concepts can still be the same, right? Even though what those players are doing compared to younger teams, the concepts can still be the same as far as how you're planning out the early part of your season, what you need to focus on in order to ensure you have long-term success, right? So that's really, really important. It's about be prepared, right? Preparation for the season, knowing your team strength, knowing your weaknesses, and then from there, building your training plan. How are you going to achieve the big picture, the season goals, through the small training portions of each practice, and building those out and understanding how that works throughout the course of the season.
Scotty, when you went from obviously a pretty high level playing career, both playing professionally, national team, go to Long Beach State, you're coaching at a high level. That's one of the best college teams we've seen in a long time. You were also coaching club at the same time, right? When you were in obviously you are now. Did you have to change your thought we're using the word process here a lot. Did you have to change your thought process in terms of how you started a season out, training, say, this year was 16 Royal versus coaching that great team at Long Beach State?
Really there wasn't a lot of differences, to be honest. And the main reason I say that is because a lot of the guys that I was coaching were 17 under guys, 2 of which were, top recruits that were going to Long Beach State in 2 years. Number 1 recruit in the nation and number 5, I think it was. A couple of those other guys were going to Stanford and Santa Barbara and all these big-time schools, UCLA. And so what we really had to stress more with our club guys compared to the guys at Long Beach State were the basics, to be honest, because we teach them so many advanced skills, but it's the whole theory of you can't, run before you walk. You're trying to hit this super fast set, but you're being super, super fast to be able to hit this set when you have to be more patient and slow it down. And it's just kind of just tweaking everything along the way. And so we actually spent more time, the basics and driving in the fundamentals and the techniques of those guys. Whereas, all of our guys already have that at Long Beach State. For them, it's really just fine tuning those skills. And what I want to piggyback on what Bryan said before was, the biggest thing, and I love how Bryan ended that there, is the long-term success for the athletes. If you're on, 14 Royal and you're coaching those guys, and Jimmy does a phenomenal job, and not only is it about winning at the end of the year, but it's about making these guys the best volleyball players they can be to advance to the next team that they're going to be playing on. You know, same with, you know, Matt at 18 Royal. He's taking this group and he's making them the best they can be for that team to try to go on into JOs and win. But ultimately, he's preparing them to be a collegiate volleyball player. So that long-term success is almost twofold in a way. You know, that we're trying to, you know, also for like my guys, I'm trying to prepare them for their high school seasons as well. Some of them might be role players on my team, but they're going to be the man when they go to their high school team. And so this long-term success goes in so many different ways.
So kind of want to go for the coaches now, and what kind of ideas we want to give them during the stay at home. Kind of want to go in two different directions. One, the process, and Bryan kind of alluded to part of it, but the process of coaching in a tournament or going through a tournament season. We got a, you know, pretty good running inside joke in our club about November Nationals and how intense some people get at, you know, the turkey trot and the October, you know, the Halloween tournaments and things like that. And it's like, guys, pump the brakes a little bit, you know. So ultimately, it's like, you know, when you think about tournaments, and Bryan, I kind of want you to go into this, the difference between your lineup choices, difference between what you're saying in a timeout, the difference when you're taking a timeout, you know, starting in October and November, you know, for the boys, it'd be in the ladder series, going into qualifiers and then nationals.
Obviously, early in the year, there's going to be a lot more flex with playing time because you're trying to find your team. You're trying to find, you know, you're investigating who your guys are, right? We've seen them in the practice gym, and now, you know, that time of the season, that first part of the season is the opportunity to get them on the court and see what they do in match play. Use different lineups, see which guys work together, see which guys struggle together, you know, struggle when they're on the court. Because that's obviously a weakness that you're going to have to address. Because at the end, I mean, those are almost more important than, you know, let's just say you're blessed enough, you know, you have the 7 guys, like, bam, they're it. Like, it's no question. Like, they're my 7 guys, right? Okay, well, those 3, 4, 5 other guys are going to play a massive role throughout the course of the season. So you've got to get them in the court. You've got to start working lineups and find out, and it may surprise you. You may find out that one of those guys, 2 of those guys are, you know, it's a better lineup when they're out on the court. So you have to be okay with, you know, you're taking guys on your roster for a reason because you believe that they can compete at a high level. And if that's the case, then you need to put them on the court and you need to see what they can do. There's a lot of confidence building there. It's also an opportunity for them to work on some things and creating depth of talent within your roster, which is something we talk about exhaustively, right? You have to create depth within your roster. It's something we believe in wholeheartedly. So that's super important. Timeout wise, I don't know if anything, once it's game mode, as a coach, I would expect that we're constantly talking about game-like mentality, right? As far as what the opponent's doing, how we can help our team win the next point. What adjustments do we need to be made? Do we need to be making on our end? I don't believe our timeout should really change from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. I think from a coaching standpoint, that's super important, right? You know, if we're out there crushing a team early in the year and that team takes a timeout, I may not say a thing, right? We get them water and then get them back on the court. Hey, great job. Let's keep a high focus on first contact and then whatever other game focuses we may have, and then bam, get them back out on the court, which is something I may do, you know, come late in the season, whether we're out in California or we're at a qualifier or we're at JOs. It doesn't matter, right? But I think that's really important to be consistent from the start of the season until the end, is how we approach our game management from a timeout and a communication standpoint. But I think one thing that does change early, middle of the season, right, from the end of the season is because once you get to JOs and even qualifiers, right, I've said it numerous times. Cary, I'm sure you've said it. Scotty, I know you've said it, and we both said it at the same time, is when you're in the qualifiers and JO's situation, we're going to take the win, right? We find a way to win no matter what, right? And if it's ugly, we don't care, right? You find a way to get the win. And maybe you talk a little bit afterwards about what we need to do to be better, but overall it's just about, hey, survive in advance. Let's find a way to get the W, grind through it. Early in the season, when you're going through those, November Nationals and turkey trot tournaments, you may have a team that's finding success, right? And some of our, a lot of our teams are talented enough that our coaches do a great job, and we do find a lot of success, right? But that is probably the most important time that we don't just look at it as a win, that we really identify, okay, great, we got the W, but here are some areas that we really need to be better. Whether it's, first contacts, especially first contacts on off-speed shots or anything free ball crazy, maybe our setters didn't do a great job of locating. But it's when you're getting those types of wins early in the season that you really need to hammer on the things that we know at the end of the season they're going to have to be infinitely better to succeed. And I think some coaches miss those opportunities and they just chalk it, well, why should we have to say anything? We won. Well, that's not how we're looking at it. If we're truly focusing on the development of the team throughout the course of the season, we have to be locked in on those small things in those matches. Super important.
Yep, Bryan, you said a couple things that really resonate with me. The big thing from a coach's process standpoint, dealing with the arc of the season and what kind of tournament you're in, I think game management is a huge thing. And Scotty, I'm going to throw it to you in a second, but big thing for me, the girls' season it's a little bit different in terms of, I think the boys have a little bit more of a runway into the season where they're not in the pressure cooker at their first tournament. I think, and that's one thing I think is hard for the girls' coaches from a game management standpoint in terms of the things we've been talking about. Bryan, you brought up a good point about, hey, you got a 10, 11, 12 player roster, and you have a pretty good idea what your best lineup is at that point, but those other 3 to 5 players at some point are going to need to play a role. On top of that, I think, it's interesting kind of tying the timeouts in terms of game management, since we did a whole hour long on timeouts on the first Coach's Corner. One thing for me, we joke about, hey, if you lose 5 points in a row because your serve receives bad at nationals and you're taking a timeout to tell them how to pass the ball, you might have bigger issues. But so, one of the things I've always tried to do is, as we get further into the season in some of these pressure situations, is just remind them of the process. Hey guys, we've spent hours and hours and hours working on this. You guys have been successful before. Just, rewind, think about those cues that we've been talking about, and you're going to be fine. And I think that's where, when coaches are in a timeout like that, or telling you, hey, get your platform away from your body and get your feet to the ball and things like that, that's lost on them. But, Scotty, that's why I kind of want to go to you and see how you feel about that. And Scotty just walked away. It's okay. And he's back. Good move. That was quick, Scotty. I like it.
Yeah, sorry, somebody had to go there.
Just in terms of 16 Royal, how do you feel about that this year? About that game management type stuff.
It is as my dog's barking at the door.
Sorry.
No, it is huge. Game management, and I want to piggyback on a couple things. I had a fun time. A really fun time coaching with Bryan this year out in California. We had an absolute blast, and our ideas are so much the same. It's unbelievable. It's like I'm his associate boys director, And the cool part about game management aspect with my guys is that, I agree with exactly what Bryan said, is in timeouts from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, they shouldn't vary at all. At the beginning of the year, you are literally trying to start teaching your guys how we are going to handle certain situations during a match. And if you get into a qualifier and you change that, all of a sudden your guys' mentality changes immediately and they're like, whoa, what's going on? Why is coach changing timeouts now when we've done it the same way all year? And I think that kind of just screws with them a little bit. Game management with my guys is I like, whether it's even in a qualifier or not, playing time is a big one. And we're not even going to get into that, but I need my guys to be able to play in all matches. I'm a firm believer that you're never going to win a tournament with the same exact group that you start the tournament with. It's impossible. And at some point, somebody's going to have to step up and take that other position from side, whether it be the other guy's not performing, whether he gets injured, whether he's just not having a great day mentally or whatever it is. So many different variables go into that. And so, game management wise, you have to be really playing it and giving so much confidence to your guys that they can step into that role. Now, like you alluded to with the girls side is you don't have that long 5-week ramp up to get going. That's why I think it's more important for the girls coaches to make sure they go and watch their players in high school and they just take massive amounts of notes on that player. So when they get them, that they're automatically working on things with them that they saw in their high school scene that they have to get better at for their system that they put into place. Game management wise for us as well is I got my little book that I bring to all the tournaments. It's a funny thing between the parents. They always tell me what the heck is Scott writing in that little book? I want to see what's in there. You just doodle in. I'm like, it's literally packed with notes inside of that book. Any little thing that happens inside of that game, I'm writing it down. And it's not to address so much during the time off in between matches or anything. It's for me to look back at our matches over the weekend and take these information and put it into my practice planning for the next week. It's like, man, oh yeah, we did not get depth in transition. We'll talk about it maybe a little bit in between the break, but you can't work on it then. You just got to snip it in the butt, talk about it, get more depth, and then we work on it in practice the very next week. And so, that's the biggest thing that I always really try to focus in on is, getting my players playing time as much as possible because I always want to make sure that they're ready to go. Making sure I'm writing down information of what I can, control the next practice. Because a lot of coaches get out there and they're like, I don't know what to work on the next practice. It's like, well, you should have taken a lot of notes in those matches because if you're not taking notes in those matches, then you have no clue what you should be working on. And that's reminding you to go back in there and work on that to make your team better later on.
I think it's a good segue. Talk about a little bit about practice planning from a coach's process. We all come from similar volleyball backgrounds in terms of how we grew up with volleyball, and I'm sure everybody that's our age or any age really. I remember having practices where the coach said, "You got to pass 100 balls that hit my finger before we get out of this drill." It's like, okay. So how long is this? So, if I go back in time, the thing I would ask coach, so coach, how long do we have to do this? Is this going to be the whole practice? And I'd probably have to run and I'd get in trouble. But, I think, Bryan, that's kind of want to go to you and talk about skill development and the process and what coaches should be focusing on, and, whatever the skill is.
Well, I do like this segue because I think it's super, super helpful for coaches to understand, you should have your season mapped out to a certain degree as far as what areas that you really need to focus on within your team, right? But it is unbelievably crucial that once you start getting into tournament play, if you are identifying things that are massive weaknesses that you didn't currently have identified prior to getting into tournament play, you need to alter your training plan and immediately start to address those, right? If it's things you haven't worked on yet, let's say, blocking schemes or whatnot, if you're coaching an older, more advanced team, right? Okay, we're introducing those, but that's going to take time, right? You've got to allow that to play out. But if we're struggling mightily in serve receive or defensively, right? Or if our serving is just atrocious, which to be honest, serving and passing, you better be hammering on that immediately from day one, and it doesn't stop. You better be serving and passing at every single practice. But, to follow up on that, once if there are glaring things like Scotty was talking about when he's taking notes, right? And if you're not making notes on things that you really struggled with in a tournament and addressing it that week in practice, that's poor practice planning. You're not doing your job as a coach. So you want to make sure that you do have a guideline of how you're setting up your practice planning. And I'm a huge believer in, it doesn't matter what age you're with or what development level you're at, serving and passing needs to be happening right away at the beginning of the season. It should be the first thing, one of the first things that you're doing. And it needs to be relatively live. Obviously you adjust your drills based on where your players are at developmentally. And if you need to slow things down a little bit, that's fine. But it should still be challenging, and it should be as game-like as possible. And that's really important from a practice planning point of view, because what you want to do throughout the course of your season with practice planning is you really can take like 3 or 4 drills, maybe, that are real simple but game-like at the beginning of the year, and then continue just to build on them as you go throughout your season, so they become more challenging, right? You can start putting point structures on things, if not putting point structures on them immediately, right? Which then brings in the challenge point, right? The challenge point of view, like Cary, you just alluded to, with pass the ball here 100 times. Okay, well, great. What does that do, right? But once you start putting specific criteria on things, that helps lock in the focus and helps the kids understand, number one, how it translates into the game, how it translates into the match, if you're keeping it game-like within practice. And then it allows you to also build upon those drills throughout the course of the season, which then makes your practices way more efficient. Because if you're not having to reinvent the wheel to your kids every other practice and explain these brand new drills, right, you're saving an infinite amount of time, and it's more time that your kids are spending on the court, getting in training and getting touches and getting better. So I firmly believe, from a practice standpoint, that keep it simple and allow the drills to build on themselves throughout the course of the year. And you're going to find yourself doing way less talking and way more training and competing in your practice gym.
Yeah, I think when it's interesting to compare process and results, because I think when you talk about results, you win or you lose, right? And I think there's no gray area there. We can, as coaches, we win a match, like Bryan said, hey, let's talk about what went well. Let's talk about what we still need to work on. When we lose a match, it's like, hey guys, why, what could we have done better? What do we need to work on? What should we, when we go into our next match, what do we need to adjust? But I think process frustrates people. And I think, Scotty, I'm going to throw this one at you, and you can take it, you can run with it where you want to, but I think the process frustrates the coach because, for a lot of different reasons. I think sometimes we feel like we're not doing a good enough job. Maybe, our practice, we're about our, how we're training. We get frustrated with our players. We feel, if they're not performing or their effort isn't the way it should be. And I think the process, and obviously players get frustrated in the process as well. We maybe internalize it a little more than they do, and it eats at us and we lose sleep about it. But I think that's one of the things that coaches get scared about, I think, Scotty, is just that frustration through the process.
Yeah, and I've been a frustrated one myself a couple times. I can't lie. The process is tough, man. That's the whole thing that I always talk about with my guys too, of, we want the process and not the results. And it's very much the growth mindset over the process-driven mindset, the growth mindset over the fixed mindset. And we pretty talked about this really, really well. I know Josh did as well on our Zooms. But where Bryan is 100% right in practice planning, I think that automatically rolls into the process of our teams as well. If you keep it simple, and I'm a big person on progression type drills as well, like Bryan's alluding to, of you have 3 or 4 drills that you do all the time, and then you just build off of those drills and you make them more difficult to manage. It's just like you alluded to, Cary, on you know, passing 100 balls right on the top of my little finger. Is you give these, some coaches give these kids drills that in the back of their mind, they almost automatically know they're never going to be able to reach it. But they're almost hoping at some point, they're like, man, but if we could reach that goal, we would be really, really good. But you're automatically really setting your team up for failure because of the fact that you know they're not even possible to even reach that milestone. And so process is so important for us coaches to realize that it's going to be a daily battle that we're going to have to, as coaches and as players, to really try to figure out inside of what we're doing. Small gains over the huge win over time, and that's why we have, you know, 8-month seasons. You know, I always talk about Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, it took a lot of years to build that place, man. You know, and it's going to take that with your team also. But you cannot get frustrated. You got to be determined to be able to reach your kids in a way that, you know, if we can win a little bit here and a little bit there, we're going to get better at the end. Now, one of the big things, too, is I'm a big believer that you can actually learn more from a win than you can learn from a loss. And I think too many coaches see a loss and they're like, oh, my God, we lost again. You know, it's like, well, you know, hey, we won. Great. That's even better, right? So let's learn from that win just as much or even more than we learned from that loss, because that process is going to help us, because you're not going to win every single match. We know that. You know, there's a lot of teams that are going to lose during the course of the year, and then they get over that hump, and there's that process, and they finally get that result, and they're like, then we build off of it, which is great. You know, in the fall, my team in the fall, we lost quite a few really bad matches in the fall, but we built off of those things, and we knew, because I set my team up from the very, very beginning in saying, guys, it's okay for us to lose. You know, we are going to lose. But we have to learn that that's all part of the process, is losing. And then once we lose, we got to learn how to lose, because losing, you also learn how to lose, and you learn how to win. And once we can do that, we're going to help the process out by just sticking to the course of action of where we want to go in the end. And I think that's also, as a coach, you have to map out, you know, when is it okay for us to lose, you know, and then build off of that along the way. But I firmly believe that, you know, it's a mindset that you have to have as a coach to not get frustrated when you start to lose, because that is all part of the process. Hugh McCutcheon was one of the best people at this ever. He knew in 2004, 2005, when we started after the Olympics, that we were going to lose a lot, because guess what just happened in Athens? We lost. And it's not all of a sudden you're going to have the same team and then, well, you know, it's a new year, we're just going to win. I mean, that's not how it works out. You have to put things in place that are going to help you along the way with that process, and have little goals. Like, I'm always a big person on, you know, hey, we won today 25-23. You know, a lot of coaches see that and they're like, what? We won 25-23. We should have beat that team 25-11. It's like, well, does it really matter if you win 25-11 or 25-23? It's still a win. Obviously, not the overall result that we wanted, because of, it should have been easier because the team was easier. We should beat them even more, but we let them come back because we played bad at the beginning and all these different things. But at the same time, is the overall result that we got finally was the win. You know, and there's little bits and pieces that we have to figure out, and that's all part of the process of where we want to be later on.
I think it's interesting, Scotty. You know, you said it's important. You know, it's important to learn from wins, and it's important to learn how to, you know, to learn from losses as well, if that makes sense. Sorry, stumbling over my L words. Reasons that I love club volleyball tournaments, you know, with the collegiate game, it's like, you know, you play on Saturday and you lose, you might not play for another 7 days. So it's like, okay, guys, go home, you know, get some rest. We'll talk about this on Monday. In club tournaments, like, you lose a tough match on day 2, and I always tell people the cool thing is, hey, we get to play again. You know, we're going to play again in an hour and a half. And I had players look at me like, you just, you know, you don't care about losing. I'm like, oh no, I hate losing as much, if not more than anybody. But through experience, you know, we learn how to compartmentalize those losses. And I always like to say after a loss, like, guys, this is bad. Losing's bad. But we can make this a positive thing. If we take what we learned from this loss into this next match in an hour and a half, and we improve on those things and we turn those things around, then it's going to be an incredibly positive experience. But if we get lost in the mindset of we just lost and we're terrible and we stink, then it's probably going to compound on itself in the next match. And so, you know, Bryan, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's where I think learning how to deal with some of the frustration and teaching our kids how to deal with that frustration is pretty important.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts. And I, you know, I love, you know, like Scott said, with you win this set 25-23 and it ends up being the match winner, but you should have beaten the team by, you know, what's the first thing I'm going to say to a team when we come out of that? I'm going to say, hey, great job. We got the W. Way to fight through it, right? Because one of the biggest things that, you know, you want to find a toughness in a team, right? Great teams, and I've said this numerous times, teams I've coached, right? Great teams find a way to succeed when they're not playing their best. And that's such an important lesson for these players to learn, right? And I hear some coaches when they pull out a win against a you know, less superior, or, you know, an inferior team in their mind, right, that they should crush. And they're just like, oh, well, thank God, because that would have been embarrassing or whatever if we would have lost. Well, no, let's go the other direction and give the team some credit. And then, hey, great win, way to find a way to fight, you know, fight through it and get the W. Now, why did we put ourselves in that situation? Because more often than not, it was errors on our side that caused us to be in that situation. Okay, what can we learn from that, right? Did we lose focus, right? Did we lose focus from behind the end line? Did our serving go to crap, right? Did we just start making a ton of errors because we weren't locked in offensively? So I think how we phrase that is super important. And there's a skill to that. There's an art to that. And a lot of it comes from, like you said, Cary, suppressing your emotions and learning how to, okay, I have to lead here, right? I can't allow myself to feel the frustration of the fact that we, you know, eked out a win. You have to know how to process, okay, how am I going to address this to make sure that we get the most out of it? And it goes the same for a loss, right? Especially in a club situation, right? Where you're probably going to have to turn around and play another match. And knowing that, okay, it doesn't matter. Like we have to have that ability to, you know, have short-term memory loss, maybe process a few things that we need to be better at. And then you're right. This is outstanding. We get an opportunity in an hour to step back on the court and fix some of this. And that's the beauty of volleyball, right? You start a new set or a new match at 0-0, let's go. So yeah. And I also wanted to touch on the, you know, the process piece that Scotty was talking about earlier. It's, you know, I think a really important part of this is patience on the coaching point of view. You have to be patient. Creating talented volleyball players, creating talented players, period, is a marathon. It is absolutely not a sprint. And you may be the first leg of that marathon coaching that kid when they're 12, 13, 14 years old, right? And they may not really start showing their true potential and what they're ultimately capable of for another 2 years, right? But what you do with that player at that time is so massively important. And you have to understand that from a process standpoint. It takes so long for a lot of these kids to truly develop and reach their potential. So what we have to do is continue to challenge them, right? Be patient, but continue to challenge them to find success. When they find success, that's when we tweak it, set the bar a little bit higher to push them so they're continually excelling, right? And that comes through persistence, right? We have to be persistent as a coach. When we set the standard for expectations on work ethic, we've got to hold them accountable, right? And it doesn't matter what level your team is is playing at, right? Or where they are, right? The expectations for work ethic in the gym, they have to be adhered to at all times. And that's probably the most important things that our coaches have to be persistent on, right? If they're persistent on that, then they can be patient and trust that I'm doing my job and these players are going to develop throughout the course of time.
I think interesting, Brian, that you say that. I think interesting concept that I wish I would have learned earlier in my coaching career is not asking a player to do something you haven't worked on with them, and if they haven't worked on it, allowing them to experience it and see how it goes, and give them some feedback later. But I think when we're talking about the process for our like the mental process for our players, and we're in the middle of a tournament and we're trying to deal with adversity or deal with success, and we haven't had those discussions in the practice gym. I think what you said about holding them accountable for things and creating standards and goals as a collective and holding each other accountable for that. One of the best experiences I had, I thank a couple of my coworkers for this, with high performance, was coaching an 18-year-old girls team. And every practice we'd have the plan on the whiteboard, but we would also have kind of a circle that had different positive and negative words on it. I don't remember exactly what they were, but you can probably have a good idea, selfishness, or hardworking, or are we giving, are we taking? There's a bunch of different words up there. And it certainly, at water breaks, we would go over to the whiteboard and be like, okay, somebody point on the whiteboard where we're at right now. How are we acting? Are we holding up our end of the bargain? And I think that really helped going into tournaments, because we could have those meaningful discussions in a 30-second timeout to either reset or to accelerate. Interested to hear, Scotty, your thoughts on that kind of a mental approach, making sure that we're doing it in practice so that we can apply it in a match setting.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I've actually used that one, Cary, on the board and with the circle and putting different words up on there, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the team is 12 people that need to work together, and that's how you build the team. If one person is, I always talk about it as being on their own little island, then the team doesn't work, and you all got to make sure that we're all buying in for this one common goal. I learned that from Hugh McCutcheon. Like, that was the best person that ever, he is a Napoleon type figure, very much so, Hugh is. And if you do something wrong and he tells you to do it right and you keep on doing it wrong, he just beats you down. And then the first time you do it right, he praises you like you're almost a superhuman being, And then from all that beating down, you're like, woo, like, holy moly, I did it, and that's just, it starts, just snowballing that you keep on doing it right over and over. I always like to use the exact same way of on the back of the board, putting their initials, and then they're writing down one or two things that they can hold themselves accountable for. And then, the old David Lee story is a great one for me, as we used to do this. And of course, middle blockers are out half the time, and he goes to the board and he's looking at everybody's thing that they put down on the list. And then somebody doesn't dive after a ball, like on the list, they say they're going to dive after the ball. And he just starts berating them in the middle of practice because they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. But David's out on the court, we used to also joke around drinking a Mai Tai on the side of the bench, looking at people's lists to see who he can throw underneath the bus, But it's important to hold each other accountable and to make sure that, you're all holding up your end of the bargain. It's really important, I think, as coaches, and Brian just said this, is that you got to make sure that, you as a coach aren't being selfish in the way that you want to do things, and I don't know, I think hopefully I'm putting this the right way, is you can't be up here before you're down here, and making sure, and I love the way that you use that, Cary, with the board and the circle, and I've used that quite often, is that you got to gauge your team where they're at that day. I mean, one day they could be selfish. The next day they could be super outgoing and doing everything for each other. And, like Brian's talking about is, the expectations that you put in of work ethic right off the bat, they're working harder than they've ever worked in their whole entire life. But how do we get them to do that exactly the same every single day? And it's virtually impossible. The expectations are there, and you set them, and hopefully you're in some sort of area up here. You're not like a roller coaster, going up with peaks and valleys and all that stuff. And so to manage your team with all these different personalities, all these different, for better or less words, egos, is really important. But when you set something in place, and work ethic is like my number one thing on my team. I learned that when I went to Long Beach State, that was their number one thing. You only get to the national team if you have the top of the line work ethic. I mean, there's not one person in the national team gym that doesn't work harder or tries to work harder than the next person, because that's the only way that you make the last 12 to be in the Olympics. That's the majority of the reason why starters are starters. They do have the best attributes, and some can spike harder than the others and are better volleyball players. But the ones who work harder than the other ones, you can manage those players way easier than you can the ones that are sitting on the bench pouting that they're not on your team. And those are the people that you have to spend more attention with. And it's unfortunate, because you want to spend more attention to the kids who are the better players that do everything that you ask for than the ones that aren't doing it. But if you got to make sure you spend time on those guys, because at one point when that other person, goes down because of injury, you're going to need that powder to come on your team and take that role. So if you seclude that person at the beginning and you don't manage your team well enough at the beginning, you're never going to get that guy to be on board like you have the one that's top of the line work ethic all the way through. And so managing your team is absolutely massive, and it's going to be a day-to-day process all the way through. Last thing I'm going to talk about that, and coaches, is a pretty funny thing that I heard one time when I was on the junior national team, and this is like stuck with me my whole entire life. And it's about like coaches playing favorites. And coaches play favorites for sure. I always say I play favorites to the guy who works the hardest and talks the most. That's my favorite player. And sorry if it is, but that's a controllable thing on their end of the bargain. It's not the person who's the best volleyball player. And too often players think that. Too often parents think that. And it's really not, that person. And I think we can all understand that it is sometimes, like it is the best player, but most of the time the best player works the hardest. So it is the best player, but you got to manage your players, and hopefully you're not playing favorites, but more times than not, you are going to a little bit.
Yeah. She's my favorite. She's playing because she's the best player.
100%.
But anyway, Bryan, we're going to wrap it up here, but I'm sure you have a bunch of thoughts you want to get off your head. So I'm going to leave you with the last thought.
I wanted to follow up with one thing real quick there. And I know Scotty's heard me say it, Cary, you probably heard me say it in the gym, right? I talk a lot about atmosphere, right? What type of atmosphere are we creating in our gym? As these players get older, right, you get into the college scene and whatnot, like once they get to a certain point, they still have to be taught what the level is at whatever, wherever they are in their playing career. But it's super important as club coaches, right? Especially the younger they are and the newer they are to playing at a higher level. The beginning of the season is absolutely up to the coaches to make sure that they are driving home how hard these kids are supposed to be working in the practice gym, because they don't know any better, right? And you hear a lot of coaches like, oh, I don't know, my kids just don't work any hard. Okay, well, who's that on, right? Have you taught them, right? Have you held them to that point where, my goal as a coach, right, was at some point throughout the season, I really hope to be able to turn that over to the kids, right? But the only way that I can do that is to ensure that I've 100% guaranteed that I've taught them what that expectation is and what that level is. And then once they start to achieve it and understand it and they're doing it consistently, then I'm able to start to step back a little bit from that standpoint, right? And then when we get into a practice, right, and we're 20 or 30 minutes in and it's just kind of flat, right? There's not a lot going on. I'll stop. I'll bring it in. And some people that know this, have seen me coach before, have a hard time believing this, that I won't do a lot of yelling and screaming. I'll simply bring them in and say, hey, is this the atmosphere that we want to train in? Is this atmosphere making us better? And the guys can all look at themselves and they know. And I tell them not to even answer. Don't answer. Go out and change it. You guys own that. You understand what the level is. Go out and own it and make the change. And sometimes it may take 3 or 4 reminders, right? But you have to get to a certain point in your season, and I don't know when that'll be, right? Hopefully it's a month to 2 months in the season, hopefully. Sometime it may take 3 to 4 months. But at some point you want to turn that over to your players. But the only way that happens is if you've taught them what the standard is. And I think that's really, really important as a coach to understand. You have to set that standard. And it has to be the whole coaching staff, right? And how do you get to that place? Number one, you have to set the example. You have to set the example about being present, right? Like we hammer our players about being in the practice gym. You need to be in the practice gym. Okay, well, that means the coaches need to be as well. If you are not physically present in the practice gym on a consistent basis, where we know things are going to come up and every once in a while a coach isn't going to be able to be there, that's okay. But if it's fairly consistent, you're not in the gym, are you going to get buy-in from your kids? Probably not. You're not. You're going to lose credibility if you're not in the practice gym. It's pretty simple. That shouldn't be a shocking thing to hear about being an excellent coach. But it's not only being physically present, it's about being mentally present. We challenge our players. Be locked in. Once you're in the gym, on your way to practice, you should be mentally preparing to have a great practice. What am I going to be great at today? What am I really going to focus on? Coaches need to be doing the same thing. When you're in the practice gym, be mentally engaged when you're on the court and be prepared to make your players better. If you're not doing that, you're automatically a step behind and you're failing your kids. And then it goes back, being prepared, right? Are you prepared with your team's strengths and weaknesses at that point in the season? Are you following your training plan seasonally while making adjustments based on what needs to be addressed, right? And I've already talked about some of this stuff is be persistent, right? You have to be on these kids. You have to be consistent and persistent with what you're doing from a work ethic standpoint and holding them accountable. And then that goes back to being patient as well. Know that it's going to take time, because when you constantly remind yourself to be patient, that can really help you as a coach to eliminate some of your frustration. And know that, the frustration should come out when the work ethic is not being met. That's where your frustration should come in. If they're making skill errors because they're trying to improve, right, but they're mentally and physically working as hard as they can, you can't be frustrated with that. And that's really hard. But if you're patient and you consistently remind yourself of that, and that's, I love, what Scotty brought up earlier with Hugh, with he's all over you and all over you and all over you until you do it right. I call it that light bulb moment, right? One of my favorite things as a coach, right? When you know that a kid's been struggling with something and you've been all over it, and then all of a sudden it clicks and you see it on their face. Like they just light up. They're like, oh my God, I did it, right? And as a coach, like I've seen coaches do this where we say, oh, well, thank God he finally figured it out. No, like praise the hell out of that kid for that, because firsthand how much they've been struggling to try and achieve that goal, that success, no matter what it is, right? We need to praise the hell out of that, right? We should be all over them on that. So that goes into being the positive, right? It's one thing to challenge, and I love challenging my guys. Cary, I know you love challenging your girls. Scotty, you're all over your guys, right? But you can do that and still do that with a positive framing, right? And that's where ultimately where your kids really start to believe in you, right? And they trust that we're here to make them better, right? We have their absolute best interest in heart. And the more you're able to challenge them, but challenge them with a level of positivity that we believe in them and we believe that they can be successful, the faster you're going to climb that hill, or the faster they're going to run that marathon, if you will, right? And start to find the success that we're looking for through our process.
Brian, I love the fact that you said a light bulb moment, and it immediately reminded me of a story just from last year with the 18 Royal Girls. And we're at Nationals. We're in the quarterfinals. We're in set 2. It's like 21-18 in what ended up being our last match of the year. And one of our left sides performed a skill that she hadn't been able to do the whole season. We had worked on it the whole season. Basically, she was high enough and she's tall enough and she's strong enough. We kept trying to get her to open up her body and just go big to 4. Forget the block, forget the libero, just crush that ball to the tee. And she couldn't do it. And matches, she was hitting balls under the net. And I'm telling you, in the last set of our last match of the season, she did it. She crushed the ball. She turned to the bench, she's like, I did it. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it was like, I totally got lost in that moment. We ended up losing the match. It was a really, really good match. And her mom came running over to me. She's like, can you believe she did that? And I was like, well, kind of. We've been working on it all year, but it was just a really weird, it was a great light bulb moment that when you talk about sticking with the process, it took a whole season. It was almost the last play of the season. So it's really good to remember that. Thanks for bringing that up. Anyway, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you guys for taking the time to do this today. Coaches, don't forget, if you have any ideas, email me. We like volleyball, so no topic is too small, no topic is too big. So just hit us up with any ideas that you have. So thanks again, Brian, Scotty. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you guys soon.
Love it. Thanks, guys. Love it.